SMHA, Southern Mutual Help's mission is building healthy, prosperous rural communities. And it doesn't just say for some. It implies, of course, for everyone. And so we work particularly with those folks most marginalized. In the later years, it has really brought us to understand how important policy is in making that happen. It was a defining moment in everyone's lives in the first bottom third of the whole state of Louisiana, from Mississippi to Texas, in this state. And I remember as we had fled Katrina, not knowing where it would go, I was watching the devastation, and everyone was talking about the hurricane going into New Orleans. And we were focused on all the rural towns, villages, settlements that were around in South. The Lafitte's, the Jean Lafitte's, the Buras, the Venice, the Boothville, Violet, St. Bernard, all those little communities. And I began thinking, what's happening to the rural people? What's happening to their land? What's happening to their holdings, their house, their children, their schools, their churches? You know, and so right away, within 48 hours, we knew we had to play a major role, and we don't have any federal funds, and have not had any federal funds in this whole rural recovery. It's all done through the generosity of people from all over this country. Right away, within 48 hours, we needed to have a concept that would hold this activity. And 3 weeks later, when Hurricane Rita came through and was an even larger hurricane, we knew that we had done the right thing. So we created something called the Rural Recovery Response, the Rural Recovery Fund to hold the money in, and the Rural Task Force, Rural Recovery Task Force, which is all the people, whether they're partners that fund us, whether they were volunteers like yourself as a videographer, or your son who's out helping to put a house nearly 3 years later into place. So we also knew something else that I think the American public did not know. That Hurricane Katrina was survived by most of the rural communities. And even New Orleans survived Katrina until the levees broke. And when the levees broke, it was a horrible situation, as all of America, in fact, the whole world has seen. They have seen that we don't have the will to know how to recover from a major disaster. And so a lot of attention was brought there. There were at least 200,000, I think, housing units and other facilities in New Orleans and around that were destroyed. What people don't know is that there were 130 rural communities from Texas to Mississippi with another 200,000 churches, schools, clinics, facilities, and homes that were either destroyed or inundated that had to be either rebuilt or mucked out and tried to be saved. And I don't think the American public has understood the importance of Hurricane Rita, which, by the way, when it came in, brought with it, in some places, a 28-foot surge of water, literally a tsunami, that in the case of Holly Beach, which is in Cameron toward Texas, literally went in and grabbed 500 homes and drug them out to sea, so that there was literally nothing left except a stick. I mean, there weren't toilets, there weren't anything left. So all along these rural communities, there was utter devastation. And we knew we had to put some things in place, and so we began very early to do that. And one thing I have never understood is why, when President Bush stood in front of the cathedral in New Orleans, he did not do something that I think a leader of a great nation should have done. And that was, I think he should have had with him the leaders of both sides of the aisle in both houses of Congress, and every living president who could walk and get to New Orleans with him. And I think that day, right then, he should have announced, I am putting into place a national disaster recovery bond. And we're asking every American to go buy the bonds. We won a war, World War II. We were able to help rebuild Europe through the generosity of Americans. We can do this on our largest natural disaster in the history of the United States. We need to do that. And so I think that would have been important, because we would have generated about $150 billion through the generosity of Americans. They could have gone into their local banks, bought those bonds for $100 or more. That would have generated the money, and then people who were going to rebuild and not leave could have gone first into their local banks, paid off their mortgages, refinanced for building, got their money immediately on the refinancing of these national disaster recovery bonds, paid maybe $25, $30 more for their note, and then if those were tax-exempt bonds, The holder of those bonds would have made about 4.5%, which would have gone into all of the portfolios of most Americans. It would have gone into the retirement and the pension funds, you know, the union funds, all of those things. So that would have been a way of moving the recovery forward. That leadership was not there. We're still working on trying to put that in place because we feel it should be part of a nation's ability to recover using the generosity of its own people. Well, I think most of the homes that had to be swamped out and saved are in some process of being saved. We've done almost 1,000 units to date without government funds and with groups like the Mennonite Disaster Service and the Jewish Funds for Justice and volunteers from all over America. It's been truly amazing, and with donations that we've received. What I see happening is several things that are very critical. Probably three. One is the mental health of the people continues to need some assistance, and I don't think that our communities in our country is prepared, nor is the mental health field prepared to how to deliver into rural America those kinds of mental health services. They tend to want people to come in to a place and get treatment. And I foresee the need after a disaster for kind of sitting on a front porch, sitting at a kitchen table, hanging over the fence, sitting under a tree, talking to people, that is an enormous help to their recovery. That's very important. Quickly helping economically is another recovery. The second thing that has to happen that we're trying to work on now is to put into place sufficient, flexible, affordable capital that we can do what I call a layered approach in making monies available to families to recover, especially small businesses. And I think that's just very, very critical.